Generally, plot twists are deployed in movies, TV shows, books, and video games near the end of a story to fundamentally alter the context of the hero's journey, and perhaps provide one final hurdle before the day can be saved. But on occasion, storytellers decide to buck the trend and field out a plot twist right at the start of the narrative instead. I'm Jess for WhatCulture, and here are 10 video games that open on major plot twists. Number 10. Morgan's apartment is a simulation. Prey. 2017's Prey reboot opens with one of the most audacious and unexpected rug pulls in recent gaming history, with protagonist Morgan Yu waking up in his apartment and heading off to join a research team on the space station Talos 1. But first, the player is transported to a lab to perform a series of tests, effectively serving as the game's tutorial. At the conclusion of this sequence, the scientists and soldiers on the other side of the plexiglass are attacked by the vicious aliens known as the Typhon, while Morgan passes out as a sedative gas is released. Morgan wakes up back in his apartment, and after a moment, it's clear that something isn't right. He's warned to quickly exit his apartment, leading the player to shatter the literal facade of their apartment window, revealing it to actually be a simulation intended to make Morgan think he's still on Earth. In fact, Morgan is already on Talos 1 and has been for 3 years, and the Typhon outbreak witnessed prior actually happened for real. Talk about an opening that toys with players' expectations and sets an all bets are off vibe from the outset. Number 9. The Animus, Assassin's Creed. The marketing for Assassin's Creed did a masterful job of hiding a plot twist which was revealed in the game's first few minutes, and one which drastically altered player perception of the series. Though the trailers suggested that Assassin's Creed was simply an action-adventure game set in 1191 AD, in reality this wasn't true at all. After a trippy opening tutorial sequence, it's revealed that the actions of protagonist Altair are actually a series of genetic memories being experienced by his descendant, a bartender named Desmond Miles, who's partaking in an experiment in 2012. At the behest of a shadowy organization called Abstergo Industries, a machine called the Animus is able to translate these genetic memories into a simulated reality for Desmond to participate in. Needless to say, fans were stunned at both the twist and how impressively the leak pro and Ubisoft had kept their big secret under wraps. Though the modern-day storyline has divisively been de-emphasized in more recent Assassin's Creed games, thank God, it's still one of the medium's all-time game-changing reveals. Number 8. Commander Shepard dies, and then gets resurrected. Mass Effect 2. The overwhelming majority of sequels reunite players with the heroic character they controlled the first time around, because why mess with a winning formula? But Mass Effect 2 fleetingly fooled fans into believing the sequel was going to massively subvert expectations by shockingly killing off Commander Shepard in the game's opening scene. Indeed, Mass Effect 2 kicks off with the destruction of the Normandy, resulting in Shepard suffocating to death as they're exposed to the vacuum of space. Barely 5 minutes into the game, BioWare seemingly made the ballsy decision to ditch the character that players had spent dozens of hours with in the original game. But of course, that wasn't quite the case. In the very next scene, we cut to 2 years later, where Shepard has been revived courtesy of Cerberus's experimental Lazarus project, basically bringing them back to life as if nothing happened. And with that, fans breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Number 7. Kratos loses his powers, God of War 2. One of the easiest and laziest ways for a video game sequel to reset the table after elevating the hero to impossible, even godlike heights in the first game is to take their toys away at the start of the second game. And that's exactly what God of War 2 did. For though the game opens with Kratos as the almighty new god of war, his bloodthirsty warmongering invokes the ire of Zeus, who soon enough rocks up, drains Kratos' powers, and then stabs him to death with the blade of Olympus. From this point, players are basically back to square one, spending the rest of the game reacquiring their powers while fighting their way towards a vengeance-fueled final showdown with Zeus. Granted, the slippery supernatural machinations of the God of War franchise basically mean that anything goes, and things like death and power loss are only ever temporary. But even so, this came as quite the surprising brick wall at the end of a thrillingly balls-to-the-wall prologue sequence. Number 6. You play as Master Chief and the Arbiter, Halo 2. Halo 2's campaign may have ultimately been a bit of a rushed mess, especially where its finale was concerned, but it nevertheless pulled off an ingenious coup with its most unexpected narrative perspective shift. Though players start Halo 2's story mode reunited with Master Chief, roughly an hour into the campaign, they're thrown into the shoes of a Covenant elite commander, briefly introduced at the beginning of the game. As a result of Halo's destruction at the end of the previous game, the disgraced elite is given the chance to atone for his mistakes by assuming the title of Arbiter, a rank which will set him off on a revenge mission from which he will likely not return. And so for the rest of the story, the player switches between playing as the Arbiter and Master Chief, lending the central conflict an unexpectedly nuanced, multifaceted dual perspective. Though the franchise's attempts to repeat this success with Spartan Locke in Halo 5 reaped mixed results from fans, in Halo 2 it was a gamble that mostly paid off, even if it meant players got far less of Master Chief than they were expecting. Number 5. Sam Caldwell Dies, Dead Space Extraction. Though it was no surprise that Dead Space Extraction wouldn't feature series protagonist Isaac Clarke, this being a prequel and all, Visceral Games nevertheless found a way to deliver a sneaky bait-and-switch at the climax of the opening level. When the rail shooter begins, players assume the role of miner Sam Caldwell, who during a mission to extract the red marker from Aegis 7 begins to hallucinate a necromorph infestation. The player shoots their way through the mine, but at the end of the level, it's revealed that Sam was actually shooting his own teammates, who were not in fact infected by the marker. Worse still, Sam is himself then gunned down by an incoming squad, including among them Detective Nathan McNeil. After Sam quickly dies, the perspective abruptly swaps to McNeil, who serves as the protagonist for the rest of the game. Intense. Number 4. Floweys Tutorial Fakeout, Undertale. No matter the route you take through it, Undertale is a game that relishes trolling the player, and it does so from the first minute of gameplay to the last. The game opens with a tutorial where players are introduced to the smiley, seemingly benevolent character Flowey, who after explaining a few basics, asks you to walk into the friendliness pellets he fires at you. Whether you do as instructed or evade the pellets, Flowey soon reveals his true colors, that he's actually trying to kill you. As he continues to fire projectiles at you though, the fight is interrupted by the kindly, motherly goat monster Toriel, who breaks up the battle and saves the player. Now this is really just the tip of the iceberg where Undertale's devilish array of twists and turns are concerned, but it nevertheless sends a message loud and clear to players. Expect the unexpected. Number 3. The protagonist is not Solid Snake, Metal Gear 2 Sons of Liberty. There's perhaps no opening plot twist more infamous in gaming than that of Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. The game's marketing made players believe, quite reasonably, that they'd once again be controlling the previous game's protagonist, Solid Snake. But in his all-time mightiest troll, creator Hideo Kojima bait-and-switch fans with a sudden protagonist switcheroo. Though players do get to control Snake for the game's hour-long tanker-set prologue, the remaining 90% of the game is spent playing as an entirely new character, Raiden. Fans were pissed, and it didn't help that Raiden was, seemingly intentionally, everything that Snake wasn't: effeminate, whiny, and disconcertingly acrobatic. As brilliant as the gameplay still was, for many the twist soured the experience irreparably. No matter that Snake did return later in the game as a non-playable ally, under the gossamer-thin alter ego Iroquois Pliskin. If nothing else, the fact that this gigantic spoiler wasn't somehow leaked prior to release is nothing short of a miracle on Kojima's part. Number 2. It's all about time travel, Onimusha 3 Demon Siege. Though the Onimusha games have never been particularly grounded in reality, Onimusha 3 Demon Siege made the shock decision to run with the ball and introduce time travel to the franchise. Barely 15 minutes into the game, series protagonist Samanosuke finds himself inexplicably pulled through a time portal, transporting him and a wealth of the Genma army from 1582 Japan to 2004 Paris. Here we're introduced to the game's second protagonist, Jacques Blanc, played by John Reno, who is himself sent through time in the other direction, ending up in 1582 Japan. Though players were ultimately divided on the messy story and how bland the French levels were compared to the Japanese ones, the timey-wimey twist still ensured that Onimusha 3 was a truly singular entry into the franchise. Number 1. Joel's Fate, The Last of Us Part 2. As widely acclaimed as The Last of Us Part 2 was, it nevertheless suffered a colossal backlash from fans who were disappointed by its shocking early twist. Despite players being led to believe that the game would once again focus on the joint adventures of Joel and Ellie, with Naughty Dog also claiming Ellie was the major playable character this time, Joel ends up beaten to death by secret co-protagonist Abby in the game's opening stages. Joel technically dies around 2 hours into The Last of Us Part 2. Given that the game clocks in at almost 25 hours on the lower end, it's basically just the prelude that sets up the game's overarching revenge story. While many fans had theorized that Joel might die over the course of the game, few expected him to die before it was even 10% done. As angry as it left fans, it was an ingenious flourish to rip players out of their comfort zones and set up one of the most brilliantly provocative multi-perspective stories in video game history. Let me know down in that comment box if you know of any other video games that open on major plot twists. I've been Jess for WhatCulture. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. You can come and say hi to me on Twitter if you like, where I'm at Jess McDonald, but do stay tuned to us here for plenty more content.